Thank you all for coming out on this chilly evening. My name is Kathy Macchiarola. A little bit about myself. I am a Hudson resident. I live in Lakeview neighborhood. I recently retired. Yay. I'm a WPI grad, and I am certified carbon literate by the Carbon Literacy Project. This is an organization out of the UK that provides training and really is promoting the idea of knowing what your carbon footprint is comprised of and things you can do to reduce your own carbon footprint. By getting certified, I promised to do 2 projects. One would be a wide-ranging project, and this actually counts as that project. And the other is a small personal project, which I'll talk about towards the end. So my agenda today, I'm going to talk about really greenhouse gases from the aspect of food production and food waste. And then the second half will be what kind of things can we do about it. So greenhouse gases, our atmosphere is predominantly oxygen, nitrogen, argon, but some greenhouse gases exist and we need them to exist. It keeps our climate comfortable by keeping in some of the heat of the sun. But the actions of humans, the amount of greenhouse gases we are producing has set us on a trajectory to end up with a warming climate. So let's talk a little bit about some of the major greenhouse gases. So you all know about carbon dioxide. This is mainly coming from fossil fuels, natural gas, but also from the production of cement. While they cook the minerals, they're cracking off CO2. Methane is mainly coming from agriculture, but also from landfills and food waste. Nitrous oxide, that's agrochemicals at work. And fluorinated gases, this is your what's in your AC and refrigeration. And the important thing to note here is that these other gases besides carbon dioxide are more potent greenhouse gases. So methane is 25 times more potent than CO2, and it has a long-lasting impact on our atmosphere. It takes 10 years for the molecule to go away. When we look at the total global emissions, yes, 74% of it is from the things you think about, like transportation, airlines, production of electricity, industry, and also us in our own homes. But clearly a quarter is due to food and food-related activities. So I'm going to take a look at these 4 different topics here a little bit closer. So the first biggest one, 31%, is livestock and fisheries. And fisheries, it's minuscule compared to livestock. And 3/4 of that is due to cattle, whether it's dairy cattle or predominantly beef cattle. The way they digest food is called enteric fermentation. It produces methane as a byproduct. Some other animals also contribute, but really cattle is the big one. Denmark is actually the first country that has instituted a greenhouse gas tax, commonly known as the flatulence tax, but it's a bit of a misnomer as they mostly burp it out. But it's going to amount to $104 per cow. So they're serious about this. And you might ask, can we raise cattle more sustainably without all this methane? And actually, there has been some research out of University of California at Davis that shows that if you feed cattle a small amount of a specific seaweed, it reduces their methane emissions by 82%.
Wow.
Yeah. However, and what's happening, the seaweed is inhibiting these enzymes that produce the methane. But there are some major hurdles. So there's not enough of that seaweed naturally in the ocean, so they have to figure out how to farm it. And the last one is how to get these supplements into, especially the open range cattle. Dairy cows, no problem. They're always coming to be milked. I went to a dairy farm. They wear RFID collars. They walk up to a little machine in the corner, and based on the cow, they get a certain treat given to them for nutrients. So they would be no problem, but it's the open range ones. How do you get their daily supplement? But interesting nonetheless. Mm-hmm. The next big category is crop production. So you can see the kinds of things that are causing the greenhouse gases. And the last one, so the agricultural machinery, it's all running on diesel and gas and such. And so you might say, well, boy, why don't we turn those into EV versions? And there is a lot of action there, like people are talking about it. There are even some states legislating it, saying that by 2035, no more combustion engines. The problem is that the technology is not there yet. Some of these farm equipment is so large, such high power, that the amount of batteries you'd have to put on the machine causes the machine to weigh an incredible amount, like 50,000 pounds, and you cannot have that kind of compaction of the soil. Next topic was land use. So, to make farmland, they're clear-cutting forests, they're taking away grasslands, and these are important carbon sinks. As you know, trees and anything, all kind of plant matter, take in CO2 and emit oxygen. And so cutting them down is not a good thing for our climate.
And turning of the soil.
Yeah, soil is holds carbon, and when you turn it, you release the carbon. The other thing they do often is burn a field to get rid of the the corn stalks or whatever, and that's bad for the environment, and it's also kind of bad for the field. It didn't get the benefit of having that material decompose and provide some compost to the soil. Next big category was supply chain. So retail, the stores, then packaging. You think about everything has got plastic or tin cans or glass. And then transportation. So 70% of our food comes by truck in this country. Much of our food is grown in the West, so California, Arizona, these are big agriculture states. Iowa's a big one. And then the last one, food processing. So this is everything that's done to food. And kind of a incredible statistic is that 73% of our food supply is ultra-processed. So when you think about a market, excluding the outer rim of the market, everything in the middle is ultra-processed food. So moving on to the next part about greenhouse gases, food waste. EPA estimates that 30 to 40% of food that's grown, produced in the country becomes waste. And it's twice what we used to waste in 1970. And our solid waste stream is becoming a quarter food. When we look globally, China and India are the biggest food wasters. However, they are the most populous countries, 1.5 billion, 1.4 billion. We are the third most populous country, so we're kind of in the order. But these numbers here, they are in kilograms per capita waste. You can see that we're at 59 kilograms, which is about 130 pounds per person. And then I just thought this was really interesting that Australians waste a tremendous amount of food. That would be a couple hundred pounds per person of food is wasted. I do have one kind of bright spot to talk about, though. This was hot off the press Monday. Boston Globe had a wonderful article about Massachusetts being the only state that has significantly cut food waste. They've cut it by 10% in the last couple of years, according to the University of California, San Diego research. Their goal is 35% cut, but we're off to a great start. And how did we do it? So in the article, they talk about how, first step, legislation. So they have banned businesses that generate more than 1,000 pounds of food waste from sending it to the landfill. That was step one. But it wasn't that we just said this is the law and left them to it. They actually provide support so that there are advisor groups that can tell you how to get rid of this waste in a more sustainable way. They also provide signs in multiple languages so the kitchen workers do a better job of sorting the waste. They pay for composting, so they're subsidizing that. And they make connections to groups that are going to take food donations, and as well farms that are going to take food scraps. I don't know if anybody else experienced this, but growing up in Rhode Island, we used to have a bin in the ground, and we'd put all our food scraps in there, and once a week the guy from the pig farm would come and pick it up. next part of the talk is what can we do as individuals? And I've kind of broken it into two sections. First is waste not, so how do we reduce our own food waste? And want not, how to make more sustainable choices. So the first thing is to understand like how is our food spoiling in the first place? And there are three main mechanisms. So the first one, microorganisms, bacteria, etc. Temperature is a factor there, and people may or may not be aware that your fridge might not be set to the right temperature. So 37 degrees F is the ideal temperature to get the longest lasting out of your food. My old fridge used to have a digital readout, but my new fridge only has 5 positions, but the third one in the middle, I put a little meter in it, and it's 37 on the dot. Oh. So if anybody doesn't have a way to know the temperature of their fridge, I do have an extra one. Next one is enzymes. So this is the natural aging process of food. And so if you buy the fruits and vegetables, you need to plan to consume them in a timely manner or freeze them. And I'm going to talk about freezing in another slide. And then the last one, exposure to air. So if you do store foods under vacuum, they will actually last longer. There's these machines that can put them in a kind of a plastic bag without air. And there's also these new little devices that will take canning jars and remove all the oxygen. The next reason for waste, people might not know their labels exactly and might be throwing things out that actually are still good. So you think about the best if used by or before date, that's intended for consumers. It really tells you when the product is going to be at its best, but it doesn't mean that it's done immediately after. Think about canned goods. They don't expire the day after the date. They just start to go downhill in quality. They're still edible. The only ones I would worry about might be baking mixes that contain like emulsified oils, because oils will tend to go rancid after a good bit of time. Another type of label is expiration date. This is typically on dairy and meats. Those I would actually pay attention to. They're pretty accurate. But the last one, sell by date, that's not for us. That's for supermarkets, telling them when to take it off the shelf. And things should still be edible after that, but always let your eyes and nose be the judge. But one interesting thing is that in Denmark, they have reduced food waste by 25% in the last 5 years, and one of the strategies is they've opened stores that only sell food that's beyond that best if used by date at a discount. Avoiding the leftovers graveyard. So, first of all, you don't want to overfill your fridge. This is going to affect its ability to keep the right temperature. But you really want to plan to use your leftovers. They don't last more than 3 days typically. So plan to use them or freeze them. Put a label on them. Or share with your neighbors. I like to make soup. I don't like to eat it for 4 days in a row, so I'm very happy to share it out with my neighbors.
Is everybody here a beneficiary of food here?
Get on that sign up.
Another thing, I do this is keep a stock bag in the freezer. So anytime you've got little ends of vegetables, you can save it until you get enough to make stock, the basis of your soup. How about we buy less food? So this would require that you actually plan your meals, so you're buying just what you need. You might need to shop with a list. There's a lot of nice lists that you can get online if you Google it. And I also read that you should shop alone, that if you shop with somebody else, then things tend to show up in your cart that you weren't planning on. I personally avoid warehouse bulk packaging. I think unless you're feeding 6 or more mouths, maybe it's too much food and maybe you won't get to it before it's done. And another thing to consider is buying frozen vegetables, for example. They're picked at ripeness, they're processed promptly, they're going to be, guaranteed good, and you can use just the amount that you need. So speaking of freezing, if you're going to freeze vegetables, you do have to blanch the vegetables first. And this is because if you don't, the enzyme process is going to keep working even in the freezer, and the food will lose flavor and color. But if you do a quick blanch and then an ice bath, pat it dry, freeze it in a layer, dump it in a bag, it's good to go. I hit for Julian's at the end of the corn season, bought a bunch of corn, and did just this. So I'm prepared. Herbs are easy to freeze. The more sturdy ones, they can go directly into a freezer bag, squeeze out all the air, and then you've got fresh herbs whenever you want them. The more delicate herbs, they do better in either water or olive oil. And then there's a few other things you can freeze. So tomato paste, if your recipe only called for a little bit of tomato paste, put the rest of it in a freezer bag and freeze it, and then you've got it for the next time you need a little bit of tomato paste. Canned beans, I didn't know this, but you can drain them, rinse them, put them in a container, cover them with water, freeze them, and then they're ready for the next time you need beans. I make a lot of pesto. I always keep it in the freezer. And then the last one, wine. If you do have a little extra wine, yeah, I know. on the odd chance there's a little extra wine, you can freeze it in an ice cube tray, and then it's ready for cooking in a recipe, or white wine that's getting a little warm, put a white wine ice cube in it.
Ooh.
And then fruit, if it's getting closer to done, you can chop it up and freeze it, and then it's ready for a smoothie. You could also think about regenerating your food. Now, I do this with scallions and leeks. They're super easy. You literally walk out in the garden, push them in the ground, and I promise you another one will appear. Things like shallots and onions, you do need to root them first, because they're actually going to put up two plants, and you need to divide it and then plant it. Everything else, I don't have that kind of counter space to be rooting everything, so try what you like, but it's just interesting that all of these things can come back from that little root end of it. And then last but not least is composting. So you might say, well, how is composting any better than sending it to the landfill? Well, the landfill is burying food and covering it over, so it is undergoing anaerobic decomposition, so it is producing greenhouse gases. When you do your own composting, you should be turning it over to aerate it a bit, or using a container that naturally is providing more air to the pile. And then it's aerobic decomposition. This is not producing methane, it's producing nice dirt for next year's garden. If you don't have the room or the inclination to compost, there's a nice service out there, Black Earth Compost. And the thing about them is they'll compost a lot more than what I'd be comfortable to compost. Like they compost meat scraps, seafood scraps, pet food scraps, and they know what they're doing. I'm a little more scared to do that kind of composting, but...
Well, you can't. I mean, the reason they can do it is because they get such huge amounts that are heavier and generate more heat. So they can break things down that we can't in our little garden or whatever. So it's really great because you really reduce how much trash you generate if you compost. At least I use Black Earth, and I've reduced my trash to a lot less, maybe a quarter of what it used to be.
So the next part is about what kind of sustainable choices can we make. And the first one is eating food that's grown regionally and in season. Right away, it's going to have a much smaller footprint for greenhouse gases because you're not transporting it, clear from California. It's fresher, it's harvested ripe. Many of our foods that come from the West Coast are picked before they're ripe, and during transport they're exposed to ethylene gas to get them ripening. What you get local is much nicer, and we are blessed with some very nice farms in the area. I'm a big fan of for Julian's. And then the last one is something really to consider, that if the food is really out of season and it has come from far away, think South America, their carbon footprint could be huge. And a real bad boy is asparagus. Asparagus has to come on a plane, and it has to come under refrigeration to get here in our markets this time of the year. And for 1 pound of asparagus, it's producing 10 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. So think about it.
Dang.
Another thing we could think about doing is eating less red meat and maybe introducing Meatless Monday. And if you just Google Meatless Monday recipes, you'll find tons of ideas. Next one might be a little controversial, eating organic food. It has a smaller footprint, they're not using agrochemicals. And you might say, yeah, but it's so expensive. But I would suggest focus on the ones that matter the most. So this short list here, these are the ones that when you test them, they come up with lots of pesticides showing up in these products. Spinach, it's absorbed into the leaves, it's impossible to wash it. And the last one, apples. They are, the ones that you find in the store, they're sprayed with diphenylamine, which is it's an antioxidant. It's meant to increase the storage and life of the apples, but it's a chemical that's actually banned in Europe.
In case someone wants to reproduce that list, if you do a quick Google search for the Dirty Dozen, there's a list that includes those items. And they've got a Dirty Dozen and a Clean 15, kind of nice mnemonics for things that are ideal if you can get organic, and things where it doesn't really matter. So that's what we use in our household to kind of keep track of what things we're trying to buy organic when we can, and the ones that we don't really worry about.
Right, and this last list here are the ones that we don't have to worry about. Anything with sort of a thick skin, the chemicals aren't getting through it, you're not eating the skin, it's fine to get, conventional of these products. Grow your own food. So this is my own personal project. I put in, my yard has a lot of little critters in it, and they were attacking my low garden bed. So I put in a 19-foot chicken coop and put 8, waist-high raised beds inside, so I can grow vegetables and keep all the animals out, but the bees get in easy because it's just chicken wire. And I wanted to, if nobody gardens and was thinking about gardening, these are the kind of crops that I think are super easy to grow. The top part of the list, you can grow them from seeds. The last couple, I'd say go buy a plant and get a good running start with them. Last thought is, why do anything? This little sign here was made by a climate science professor, and it really sums it up. Our climate is warming. It's us, we're sure. It's bad, and we can fix it. On the bottom part of her sign, she has all these references to the research that she puts behind each of these statements. There's a website, showyourstripes.info, and it shows how, through time, how our average temperature has varied. And you can see that in just these last 2 decades, we're getting nothing but above average temperatures. And so this is up to 2023, so in another month, they'll have one more data point for this, and who wants to bet it's anything but red? This has been an incredibly warm year. So why do anything? Because there are things we can do as individuals, and I think starting with food waste and making sustainable choices is something we could all think about doing. Becoming involved in an organization like Green Hudson is another great thing. It's wonderful to see them having impact locally in our community, but also statewide, promoting legislation that's going to help our state meet its net zero emissions goals. So I hope you'll all get a few tips out of this talk, and I do want to acknowledge my instructor from the Carbon Literacy Project, Jen Gale. She has a really neat website, sustainablelife.co.uk, has lots of information there if you ever want to check it out. And I thank you all for your attention.
Yeah.